Okay, welcome everyone. We have a nice group together. Welcome to yet another globalTA webinar. Today we're collaborating with the EPTA network, so I'm really happy that you're all here. I greet everyone that's part of these networks and all of those who aren't, so welcome. As a kind of exercise, like the last time, Jan and I would like to ask you to put your where you're from or where you are at the moment into the chat. Maybe also if it's warm or cold, or if you've just had breakfast or lunch or dinner, so we get an idea where people are in the world. That's been a nice exercise so far. Jana also put a few interesting links in the chat. Maybe Jana, you can send them again, because sometimes people, when they join later, they can't see what's in the chat. So yes, globalTA, for those of you who don't know, we're a worldwide network of over 30 organizations, and we've been running these webinars for a few months now. We're trying to exchange thoughts, ideas, practices, experiences. So I'm really glad that we have yet another webinar. And also today is the EPTA network. That's the European Parliamentary TA network. There's also the link in the chat for those of you who don't know it, who aren't a member yet. Here you can find a lot of information on numerous policy briefs, report that are provided to the European Parliament. Today, we have our guests from GAO, so from the Government Accountability Office in the US. And we're really excited to have Karen and Sarah here. I'll hand over in a second. For today, we have their presentation, their input, about 15-20 minutes, and that I'll be recording, so that actually later will be online for those of you, or for those who can't join, for those of you who'd like to forward it to colleagues later, that will be available on the Institute of Technology Assessments YouTube site. Also, the link is in the chat. And then we have, after that presentation, some time also for discussion, but that won't be recorded. So that's more of an internal discussion, let's say, where we can exchange thoughts and questions. So again, as mentioned, I'm really happy to have our guests today, Karen Howard, and Sarah Harvey from the Government Accountability Office in the US. We've been in contact several times. Many of you maybe know Karen and Sarah from different contexts, but I'm really excited today to hear about their work at GAO and their work in technology assessment. Karen is the director of the Science, Technology Assessment and Analytics team, and we'll hear more about that team, I'm sure, in a few minutes. Karen has a PhD in environmental chemistry, and she has a lot of wide experience working with and for policymakers, especially in the US Congress, but also public and different stakeholders. And we saw each other in Vienna in the summer, so that was also nice. I like to think back to that conference often. So welcome, Karen. Sarah is the director also of the Science, Technology Assessment and Analytics team at GAO. She has a master in human and medical genetics, and her focus is on health policy, but she also leads this team of scientists, engineers, and analysts to provide this kind of oversight, but on also assessments and foresight for the US Congress. So we're very happy to have them both here today. And I'll hand over to you, Karen and Sarah, for your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll kick it off. I really appreciate the introductions, and I'm excited to see all of you, both new faces, new names, and definitely folks that we've seen before, both at EPTA or in some of the various places that we've been. It's very exciting. I'll start the presentation, and then Karen will pop in a couple slides in and take over for the other part of it. We encourage you to treat this like a discussion. If there's a question as we're going through, please feel free to use one of the Zoom tools to to signal that to us, or even just come off mute and let us know that you have a question. I understand there'll be questions at the end as well, and so we'll definitely make some space for that. Won't take too much time. We did create a few slides for the presentation, and if it's okay with you, I'll go ahead and share my screen.
Great.
Great. So let me know if it's working.
Yes, we can see the slides perfectly.
Excellent. Wonderful. So this presentation today is about assessing the impact of our technology assessments. And we'll start off with a little bit of information about who we are. As mentioned, we are from the U.S. Government Accountability Office. So what is that, right? Obviously, we're in the United States. We're centered in Washington, D.C., in the capital, but we have offices across the country, as far out as California, Texas, Chicago, in the middle of the country, all over the place. And we are an independent, nonpartisan agency that serves the U.S. Congress. We primarily deal in the knowledge, I guess, space where we're sharing this knowledge with the Congress with the idea of helping to improve performance and accountability across the federal government. GAO on the whole has some very important core values. We hold these truly at the center of all of our work: accountability, integrity, and reliability. And a lot of that translates into the work that I know all of you do. I know when I've been in Europe at various conferences, and Karen as well, we've talked about the honest broker, the knowledge broker, sharing that reliable, accessible information on different types of science or technology policy. And what's interesting about putting this science and technology work in GAO is this core value that's central to the entire agency and all the work done across the building. Within GAO, we have a team. We call it a team. You might think of it like a division. That is the Science, Technology Assessment, and Analytics team. STAA, as we like to call it. STA, as we're not supposed to call it, right? So this is our in-house science and technology group. We do foresight, we do S&T emerging trends, and we take both shallow and deep dives into technology. There are three categories of impact for the work that we do. First is the ability to inform and educate the Congress. And second is the influence on government agencies. And third is information we share with the public. This might be the same or a little bit different than the responsibility of the entities that you represent, but we thought we'd divide our presentation into these three categories of impact. All of our publications are therefore designed to meet these different types of impacts. And I wanted to just highlight 4 of the things that we do. I would call these our key products, the things that we focus on. One are the science and technology spotlights. So that's the first image over here. It's just the front page of one of them. These are really short, 2-page kind of snacks, I like to call them, bits of information for the Congress to help introduce them often to a new topic or get them acquainted with a particular subject. A recent one we did, as you can see, is on the malicious use of generative AI. We have a number on AI, including on agentic AI and other applications. But these S&T spotlights can cover the range of science and technology that's out there. We've done work on vaccines. We've done work in the compute space. We've done work, just really it runs the gamut. And these small spotlights are produced every couple of months, every 6 to 8 weeks on average, to just give the Congress this information that they need. When we want to know more, we want to go deeper, we'll tend to do a technology assessment. And these technology assessments take a much deeper dive. They can springboard off of an S&T spotlight. So for example, we did a small spotlight on brain-computer interfaces. We got a lot of response. We got a lot of interest from the Congress. We got a lot of questions from the public. And as you can see, those are 2 of our impact categories. So we decided to do a deeper dive with the technology assessment. And that technology assessment will often look at what is the technology, what are its benefits, what are its limitations, and what are the policy levers that might impact that space. When it comes to the policy perspective, we're really thinking about policy options. What different things on a menu might different policymakers want to do to achieve their goals? And so when it comes to brain computer interfaces or most technologies, we'll think about what laws, regulations, or other policy is applicable in that space and how it's impacting that particular technology. The third category is a technical evaluation. These sort of bridge the gap between GAO's mainstay of audits or performance reviews that act kind of like a consulting agency for the government and go in to deep dive into a program or an agency or a government function and find ways to save money or improve it. Technical evaluations do that, but from a technical lens. We'll really think about how this technology may or may not be addressing a problem or ways that it can make improvements. We may, in these reports, make recommendations to federal agencies or even make particular suggestions to Congress. You can see here from the example, this is one of our evaluations that we did on Operation Warp Speed that had to do with that COVID vaccine 19 development status as they were building that infrastructure and working on manufacturing. And then lastly, we have a number of special projects. I think of these things as kind of one-offs. These are things that will come up and that we'll do when there's a particular need. And we think there's a way that we can help inform and support the Congress primarily with these special projects. One example was a vaccine dashboard that we stood up in the early days of the pandemic and that walked through these different phases of development and let the Congress know where they were at, what was the technology readiness level, how were they progressing in their goals towards development, so they always had a reliable place to get this type of information. We measure these impacts several ways. So first, let's talk about ways that we measure our impact on the Congress. We track legislative actions, and Karen's going to show us some examples of that. We get feedback from members of Congress and their staff. So there's a number of internal projects at GAO that we might do. One we've run several times over several years is called the Voice of the Client. It's both a quantitative, so a paper survey, and kind of like focus groups and interviews where we solicit information from the Congress. Is what we're doing meeting your needs? What would be better? What is not so great? What are you interested in? And we learn a lot of valuable things from things like this. Like, they're not particularly interested in all the great methodology that we use. So we tend to put it in appendix, right? We also monitor our requests for more work. So a request for a testimony at a hearing. Our Congress will hold hearings. And one of the things that we do is we can serve as a witness in that hearing to provide often a base level information or fact check the information that they need there. So we monitor our requests for hearings. Also requests for technical assistance. This is when the members, the staff reach out for more information, for requests. When you said this in your report, what does that mean? And how does it work, for example? And we'll get back to them with a briefing or maybe a short document or an email. We have workshops and roundtables that we use to sometimes educate them, answer questions, or hold more discussion on a topic of interest. And then again, we're always monitoring our requests for additional work. If lots of stuff is coming in AI, we know that that's a signal that we need to pay attention to, right? Same thing in biomedical policy or things that have to do with quantum or other types of topics. So those are all things that we monitor. I'd like to ask Karen to take us through some of our examples.
Sure. So an example of legislative action, and the reason Sarah's kicking it to me at this point is that I was involved with this particular project. In 2018, we issued a technology assessment on sustainable chemistry. And the question we were trying to answer here was, if we could go back today and rebuild the whole chemical industry from a sustainability perspective, what might that look like, right? So the chemical industry, we all know, started a few centuries ago. Today, it uses very much the same processes it used back then, right? Hasn't evolved much over time. And while the chemical industry is trying to bring in more sustainable processes and materials and goals, trying to think through those things, they're trying to retrofit an industry that was really designed in the 17 and 1800s, right? So what are some of the technologies that are available, and how do companies think about this when they're trying to think about becoming more sustainable? We had several key findings in that report that were kind of eye-opening, I think, for Congress. So one of those is that the world does not agree on what sustainable chemistry means, right? There is no consensus definition on what this means or what it looks like, and that includes which environmental and health factors ought to be prioritized. So should we be prioritizing water use? That might be really important if you're in a place where drought is a real problem and water access is an issue. Should we be prioritizing the release of greenhouse gases and trying to get those down? Should we be prioritizing the use of toxic materials and maybe trying to replace those with things that are less toxic? Should we be thinking about waste at the end of the process and how do we minimize the waste as the process proceeds? So a lot of different ways you could measure this, and there was a lot of disagreement or lack of consensus across companies and across the industry as a whole on where to put their focus. Those kinds of disagreements or lack of consensus were holding the field back and keeping the chemical industry kind of stuck where it was. We also found that in the US, there were a lot of government agencies with a role to play. However, they weren't coordinating with each other. So the whole effort was very disjointed. So we released these findings. It sometimes takes a while for Congress to pay attention to that. And about a year later, they asked us to come testify at a hearing on sustainable chemistry, where we would talk specifically about this report, what we found, and what we thought might help fix this. And we drew on that hearing largely from a chapter we put near the end of the report called Strategic Implications, where we kind of tried to wrap the whole thing up for Congress in about 3 pages, sort of a high-level summary for them. We did that testimony in 2019. Over the course of the next year or two, several different members of Congress who were submitting bills in this area, potential laws, they reached out to us and we did workshops for them to help them understand the report. We talked to them one-on-one, answered their more detailed questions, did that kind of thing for about another year or two. And then finally in 2021, so this is now 3 years after we issued our technology assessment, a law was passed in the US called the Sustainable Chemistry Research and Development Act. And the text of that act reads almost identically to our strategic implications chapter. So we looked at that text, we said, aha, it looks like our report influenced this. This looks like an impact from our work. So we reached out to the staff that wrote the bill. They confirmed that, yes, indeed, your report was a major part of us drafting this legislation. And so we did what we call claiming an accomplishment, right? We claimed a legislative accomplishment based upon the work we had done. So that's an example of a legislative action. We don't see that very often. We have seen 2 or 3 laws pass that Congress has told us were based directly on the technology assessments we had issued, but it's not nearly as many as the number of reports we issue. It is one measure, though, that we use to track our impact. Next slide, please, Sarah. I want to turn now to our second category of impacts, which is the impacts we have on government agencies. And because we sit within the federal government, that gives us a unique ability to influence not only Congress, which is our primary client. We sit in the legislative branch in the United States government, and Congress is our main client. But we also help them oversee the work that government agencies do to implement the laws. So Congress writes a law, and then the agencies implement it and put it into action, right? So we have an ability to influence those agencies. We do that in a couple of ways. One of them Sarah already mentioned earlier, which is issuing recommendations directly to an agency. So we might go in and take a look at, let's say on the sustainable chemistry work, we might have decided that because there was such a lack of coordination, we might want to think about issuing a recommendation to agencies, to some specific key agencies, that they coordinate better. We did not choose to do that in this case. We felt there was a better pathway, but we could have done that, right? We could have issued that recommendation. Once we do that, once we issue those recommendations, we track them. We have this really extensive database within GAO where every single recommendation to a federal agency is tracked. And we follow up on it every year to see what the agencies have done. So we'll reach out to the agency. Let's say we issued a recommendation to the Food and Drug Administration. We'll reach out to the officials at the Food and Drug Administration about a particular recommendation, and we'll say, in 2023, we issued this recommendation. You agreed with it and said you were going to work on it. What's your progress? What have you done since then? And then we report back into our database and to the congressional requesters on what the status of those recommendations would be. That's pretty easy to track, right? Because you've issued a recommendation to a specific agency and the recommendation is usually very specific. Like, this agency should revise its guidance on program X to make it clear that topic Y, right? So it's a very specific recommendation. It's very easy to see whether or not the agency has done it. Agency actions that align with policy options are much harder to track. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is that we issue policy options to the broader group that we call policymakers. That includes Congress. It includes federal agencies, but it also includes industry, who often has their own policy levers they can pull. It includes academia, who controls a lot of things like the curriculum that develops our future science and technology workforce. Some of those kinds of players are also important. Very hard to track policy options because we can't see who's doing what across the entire landscape of all of these different stakeholder groups. So we freely admit we're still really struggling with how to track policy options, but it is something we would like to do a better job with. Next slide, please, Sarah. I believe the next slide gives us a look at our recommendations database. Yes, it does. So recommendations for executive action, that's because in the US, we call those government agencies executive branch agencies. So that's where our framing comes from there. The top one is an example of a recommendation to our Department of Health and Human Services. And if you can see the font there, I realize it's a little small, but it's very specific. The Secretary of Health and Human Services should do the following, right? Make different sources of publicly available COVID-19 data accessible from a centralized location on the internet. That's a very specific thing we ask the agency to do. It's pretty easy to track whether they've done it. And over on the right-hand column where it says status, you can see that we have closed this rec as implemented. That means HHS did what we suggested they do, and therefore we have closed the recommendation. Down in the bottom window, this is a recommendation to an agency called the Small Business Administration. Again, it's very specific. The Small Business Administration should develop a strategy to outline specific actions to address assessed fraud risks in a particular program that the agency leads, right? So again, pretty specific. Over on the right-hand side, you can see we're tracking the status. This recommendation is still open because it has only been partially addressed. So the agency has taken some actions, but they haven't completed everything that would be needed to close this recommendation. You can also see sort of the pink flag. This is one that we flagged. I'm sorry, Sarah, could you go back a slide? This is one that we flagged as what we call a priority recommendation. And once a year, we send what we call priority rec letters to the agencies where we highlight some of the recs we made to them that are still open and that we really wish they would focus on. So maybe we've issued this agency 100 recs over the last 5 or 10 years that are still open, but we have 20 of those that we think are so critical that we would really like their attention focused on those 20, and we call those priority recs. Okay, now you can go on. Thank you. And our third category, oh, I'm sorry, more agency actions. This was one example of agency actions in response to our policy options. So one of those rare occasions where we were able to directly see a connection between a technology assessment and the policy options we made, and then actions the agency took. So in this particular case, this is the utility scale energy storage technology assessment, which we issued in 2023. And in this one, we recommended several policy options that could be considered, including supporting manufacturing and adoption of technologies in this area, providing incentives for industry to act, which did not exist at the time we wrote the report, and defining clear goals and next steps for integrating utility scale energy storage technologies into the grid, into the power grid, right? And over on the right-hand side, you can see we've tracked a few different ways the agency has acted that tie back to those policy options, including opening some technical assistance programs that help support industry and give them insight and maybe some incentives, and then starting a program to identify early stage design challenges, again, trying to address some of the barriers that we saw. So this is one way that we do try to track policy options. Again, it can be tricky to do. Okay, now the next slide, where I think we're going to move on to our last category of impacts, and that is how do we impact the public or the conversation that's going on in the public space. So we try to do this in a lot of different ways. Our reports are almost always publicly issued. The only ones that don't issue publicly are those that are classified, of course, which we cannot issue into the public space. And the technical assistance that Sarah talked about earlier, where Congress might just call us up and ask us a question and we do something real quick for them and send it back, that is not publicly issued. But where we've done full work, we issue it publicly so the public can read it. We do publicize that work to the media, among others. So when we issue a new report, we send out information, including to targeted media outlets that we think might be interested. And we say, hey, we just issued this new report on malicious use of generative AI. This might be something you'd be interested in as a part of your journalism work. We do podcasts and blogs. GAO has a communications agency in-house called our Office of Public Affairs, and they help put together those podcasts and blogs, help us get the word out in a more accessible way to the public about our report. We do social media posts, and we do that individually. Sarah and I both post on LinkedIn and X and different kinds of social media places about the new work we've just issued, trying to draw attention to it. GAO also does a lot of posting about new reports that have come out, or they'll revisit a series of past reports when something hits the news. Maybe something comes up about crash test results for vehicles, and GAO will issue a media post that says, hey, did you know that we've done work on the fact that crash test dummies only model men and are not a good model for women and children and how they are affected in an accident, right? So we'll resurrect an old report and bring it back to the attention of the public when the news cycle seems to warrant it. We do presentations at conferences, we do webinars, all kinds of different ways we try to share information with the public. And then the next slide talks about how we track our impact on the public. There are several ways we do this. One is requests for interviews. So when the media reaches back to us and said, we'd like to interview you about this report, could be on camera, could be a print interview. That's a way we assess our impact. Okay, this is making a difference in the public conversation, right? And we can track that we've done some good there. We track Google metrics on the downloads and views of our reports. And we do that pretty religiously, pretty diligently, and we send a report about that every week around to the executives at GAO, which reports were the most downloaded, which ones had the most page views. Sometimes it's interesting. Often, of course, it's the newest thing that's been released that gets the attention, but every now and then something will come up from a long time ago. And as an example, we had a bad rainstorm and flood situation several months ago in the US where a number of children were killed at a camp, at a summer camp, right? Because the river nearby flooded and it drowned a lot of children at that camp. That was all over the news in the United States. And we had a report from 1972 on cloud seeding technology that suddenly got like 20,000 page hits at GAO. So, tracked in with the news cycle, somebody had advertised that report and a lot of people went to look at it. And then we get direct communication from the public. As directors, Sarah and I and all the other directors at GAO, we get emails every day from the public about our work. Asking, hey, I saw you did this report on prenatal supplements and which ones might have heavy metals in them. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what you found? Excuse me. Those kinds of emails we get. We also get some crazy emails from some conspiracy theorist people. So there's quite a range of emails that come in, but that's a way that we track our impact on the public. So to conclude, just to kind of wrap this whole thing up, excuse me. Just like all of you, I suspect, we struggle with how to measure our impact. It's a hard thing to do. We use all of these different methods we've just talked about. It's a lot of different ways of trying to slice the data, trying to get some data, right, that we can use to adjust our approach, to fine-tune how we do our work, how it's most useful to Congress, to agencies, to the public. But it's still a very imperfect process, and we're still learning and growing. We're looking forward to hearing from some of you in the Q&A about how you do this so that we can learn some new ideas as well. So with that, I'll close. Thank you.